Morning, church.
Morning.
How are y'all this morning? Have you ever lost faith or lost heart in someone or something? Anybody ever lost heart? Gotten disappointed? I can remember when my parents initially told me that they were separating. A long time ago. I was 13, 14 years old. My parents set me down and said, hey, this is happening. And so, as a young kid, the only thing I knew to do was just to be praying, I didn't want it to happen. And so, I'm praying, Lord, please, do something, move in this way. And I held out a lot of hope that something would change, right? And as time went by, it became rather obvious that things weren't going to change. My parents introduced me to their person that they were dating after a while. And then so at that point I started to lose heart, started to lose faith. And that can be a difficult thing. I held out hope, but I lost heart quickly. And I knew what it meant. I knew that their marriage was going to be ending, that it would end in divorce. And so today we're going to talk about faithfulness in marriage. And faithfulness can be a kind of a difficult topic to talk about. Just a few stats on divorce. Some 41% of first marriages end in divorce. 41% of first marriages end in divorce. If you get married a second time, that number goes up astronomically. It's 67% of second marriages end in divorce. And then it goes up even further for third marriages. Third marriages is almost 3 out of every 4. 73% of third marriages end in divorce. In other words, if you just get married, you are hoping against all the odds because it seems like the odds are stacked against you. If you can imagine this, imagine that you were going to take a cruise. Maybe you had signed up. I don't know if anybody likes cruises. I like going on a cruise. I still think for the money, that's one of the best vacations that you can buy. They wait on you hand and foot. It's just a great, we had a great time anyway. I know it's not for everybody, but imagine you were going to take a cruise. And you had saved, you were scrimping, you'd put all your money aside. You're like, oh, I'm going to take this cruise. I'm going to go have a great time. And, I don't know, the new popular thing is people will put those countdowns on their computers and on their phones and stuff. And it'll say, 37 days, 8 hours, 17 minutes to go on the cruise. Maybe it's just a trip anywhere, right? Maybe you're just getting ready to take a trip and you're excited about this. But imagine, if you will, if as you were getting ready to board the ship, the captain goes through you got to go through a mandatory safety meeting, but he gets everyone together and he says, guys, we just need to let you know that there is a 4 in 10 chance that the ship won't make it and it's going to go down and you'll probably die. How many of you are going to get on board that ship? Probably not any of us, right? What if they said, if this is your second cruise, there's a 67% chance that you ain't going to make it? Would you want to get on that boat? No. But thankfully, we have hope against all the odds, because the odds are stacked against us. The odds are not good when we look at just the sheer statistics of marriage, yet people get married every day, right? We are continually seeing people get married. Although the number of marriages are going down. So, that is a true statement there. And I say all of this to illustrate a point. Most people, and I've done premarital counseling now for a while, most people, when they come to sit down and do some premarital counseling, it's the bride-to-be and the groom-to-be, and they're so excited, and they're so full of hope, and they're looking forward to what all of life has promised them, and little do they know what's coming. Marriage. Everybody's excited for the wedding. The marriage, though, sometimes does not receive the same joy and excitement. And a lot of times, a lot of couples can't even make it through the honeymoon before that joy and hope and excitement has crashed down into the ground and made a horrible thud. So this leads me to my main point today. And I don't know how you guys are going to take all this. This was a really difficult sermon for me to write because there's so many different ways that I could go. But listen to what it says. Here's my main point. To be faithful in marriage, you have to maintain hope in the promises of marriage. To be faithful in marriage, you have to maintain hope in the promises of marriage. In other words, if you're going to remain faithful in your marriage, you're going to have to maintain hope not just in your marriage, but also in God and in just the idea of marriage itself. And if you lose hope, what happens is that you find your marriage will quickly dissolve. I've talked to a lot of people who are on the brink of divorce, and one of the most popular ways that they describe it, or what I hear from what they share, tends to be a lack of hope. A lack of hope that we can't work this out. This is too far gone. This is too hard, too whatever, and they have lost all hope. And once the hope is lost, it's almost impossible to rekindle that hope. And so what I'm trying to do today is to share with you guys in a way that I want to increase your hope, increase your faith in marriage, in your marriage, but also in marriage in general. So whether you're single or divorced or what may be, that you would have hope. Because God created this institution. It's something that we should honor, love, respect, cherish, because He created it. He designed it, and our goal is to have hope in it, in faith in it. So if you have your Bibles today, we're going to be in Hebrews chapter 11, verses 1 through 2, and then we're going to read verses 39 and 40 as well. If you have your app, I have the notes loaded into your app, and you can just follow along with me there. Hear now the very words of God. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. Lord, bless the reading of your word. Most of us are familiar with this passage. If you're going to talk about faith, faithfulness, this is the passage of faith in the Bible. Most of us know it because it goes through the actual heroes of faith. So it lists through Abraham Moses and all the rest. It goes through a lot of people, and it starts naming them out. And then at the end, it just kind of starts saying, and it doesn't even name people. It just starts telling what people have gone through. And it says, and all these, and so that's where we pick up in verse 39 that all of these were commended for having faith, yet none of them received what was promised to them. And so that verse there, that verse 39, is a bit haunting to me. It seems that these people, they had their good report, they'd received their commendation for their faith, yet none of them, it says, none of them received what had been promised to them. And if you think about this, just with like the person of Abraham, right? Abraham was promised an offspring, a multitude of descendants that would outnumber, you couldn't even count them all. It would be more than the stars of the sky. It would be more than the sand in the sea. And he that was his promise, and he had faith, yet he never received, he never actually realized his promise. He died, and he didn't see what God had promised him. And so faith and promises According to this passage, they tend to be tied together. There's these things, when you look at this passage, to me, there's 2 or 3 things that really just tie all this together. Promises is one idea of it, hope is one idea of it, and faith is one idea of it. And all these things tend to be, they're joined together, they're combined into this. And so this left me with the question, because if we're going to talk about faith in the context of marriage, it left me with this question: what are the promises of marriage? So if we're supposed to have faith that we can get in, that we'll get married, that marriage is a good thing because God designed it this way, what are the actual promises that we need to be looking for? We know that we may never receive them, but we're to hold on to them tightly and have faith that God is going to work through marriage and that we will have these promises realized in some way. And so I started thinking about, what are the promises of marriage? If faithfulness is a key for marriage, what are the promises of marriage? What are we actually promised? And when we get married, we actually offer up a lot of promises, if you remember. Tim Keller has this quote. He says that the essence of marriage is a promise. The essence, the very thing, that if you were going to describe marriage in some way, like what's the heartbeat of marriage? The heartbeat of marriage is a promise. In fact, it's a multitude of promises. When we say our vows, what we're doing is we are making promises to that other person. And so I want to remind you of your vows. I've done this before, and I'm going to do it again. But here are the tradition. If you did the traditional wedding vows, here are the wedding vows. I'll use my name. I, Brian, take you, Autumn, to be my wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part. Amen, right? Those are the wedding vows, and most of us said some variation of these wedding vows. I pulled apart these wedding vows, and I looked and found 6 promises in these wedding vows. I'm just going to hit them real quickly. Again, this isn't the Word of God. This is just our wedding vows. This is the promises that we make, though. So they are important because we are standing before our neighbors, our friends, our family, and before God Almighty and making promises. And these are I found 6 in here. Number 1, to have. That means that it's a promise to belong to someone else. That, hey, this is my person. I belong to you. You belong to me. So to have is one of the promises. To hold. In other words, we're promising to have a physically intimate relationship. When you're holding someone, you're not doing it from far away, you're doing it close. It's a promise of physical intimacy, that we get to be close to one another. I'm going to hold you. From this day forward, this is a promise of continuity and endurance. It means from now on, from now until, I can't even see the end of it right now at this point in my promise, but I'm saying from this day, from today forward, these are my promises. So it's a promise to endure, because we know that hard times are going to come. We know that things aren't going to work exactly the way we want them to, but I am going to promise from this day forward. Number 4, to love. That's a promise of affection. I'm going to show you affection. I'm going to pour out my love upon you. And in return, I'm also expecting, because we're both making these promises, right? I'm expecting her to pour out and to show affection toward me. This is part of the promise. It's not just a one-way promise. These are 2 people standing before God offering these promises. Number 5 is to cherish, a promise to be adored or treasured. This is one of my favorite promises. You know, we look at love sometimes, and we're going to spend some time on this, I think, next week, but We look at love sometimes as just like, that's the grit to get through some of those tough times. Man, I love you. I'm going to stand with you no matter what kind of storms come our way. That's my promise to love you. To cherish means it's not that I'm just going to just love you, but that I'm going to treasure you. That when I look at you, when I think about you, it's going to be from a place of, oh, how much I love you. Oh, how much I adore you. That's one of the promises that we make when we say our wedding vows. And then finally, number 6, we have a promised ending, until death do us part. That's the ending. It's not anything in between now and then. It's from this day forward, until death do us part. So we have a promised ending date. It's not anytime soon. It's only when we die. There's no date. It didn't put a deadline, a year on there. It is for now until we are no longer together physically. We are gone. We have gone, ascended. We are with the Lord. Everything else in the wedding vows that are mentioned, those are the limitations. And so it's very important to understand the limitations that we've put on our promise. And we say things like this: for better or for worse. So what's the limitation? There isn't one. It's whether you're in good times or in bad times. We say in sickness and in health. What's the limitation? There isn't one. It means whether you're feeling good that day or feeling terrible. Whether you are up and working or whether you are laying in a hospital bed. That's the promise. That's the promise. No matter what, I'm saying, I promise these things to you, and she or he is saying back to you, and I promise those things to you. It's a promise. Another way of looking at this is the biblical idea of covenant. We would say that marriage isn't a contract, but a covenant. Marriage isn't a contract, but a covenant. When you get married, you are making a covenant between your spouse, you, and God. All three of you are making a covenant together. Marriage is a covenant. And for a lot of us, we struggle with this word because it's not a word that we use much anymore. It's unfortunately just been regulated to HOA terms, right? We got the housing covenants. We got those things. And people they go, I don't even know what that means. It sounds funny. I don't like it. But let me just kind of just say one of the main differences, or the main difference between, say, a contract and a covenant. A contract, they are easily broken. As soon as expectations are not met in a contract, we can break it. And too many times, marriage is treated like a contract instead of like a covenant. So when our expectations aren't met in a contract, we break the contract. And there are all types of contracts. Renting a car, buying a house, pest control companies have contracts. Okay? But these are all very easily broken. As soon as the expectations are not met, we break the contract. And I'll give you an example. You have a contract with your cell phone company, right? And what the contract is that you're saying, I'm going to pay you $60, $100, $200 a month, whatever you're agreeing to, and you are going to provide me with cellular service that I'll be able to call people and connect to the World Wide Web. As soon as they do not do that, what do? You're not going to pay them if they don't provide you the cell service, right? You don't just say, well, you know, I guess I just keep sending the bill in and maybe one day I'll have cell service again. You would stop paying. Why? Because that's the contract. It's two people agreeing on the terms, and if one person does not hold up those terms, boom, contract done. Covenant, though, is different. Covenant is meant to be a lifelong agreement. It's lifelong. It doesn't end. And if one person doesn't hold up their terms of the covenant, you still honor the covenant. The covenant, in one sense, it's the top. It's the priority. We honor the covenant. And this is where a lot of times when we look at, say, a housing community and the covenant's there, the covenant is king. You may want to try and break the covenant, but someone, I promise you, Brother Bob can say amen, because he's an HOA guy, he's the president, right? Listen, someone will come along and enforce that covenant. They will say, hey, I don't care what your thoughts, your desires, I don't care that you thought it was cool to build a brick wall 20 feet high along your back edge of your property so you didn't have to look at any of your neighbors. That does not matter. What matters, though, is you are in a covenant relationship with this community, and that covenant says that you can't do this. And so you have to honor that covenant, and you're going to have to tear that brick wall down. And if it only went that simple, right, Bob? I know. Here's another one. Suppose that you got into a contract with a lawn care company, and then they didn't cut your grass. You went outside and you're knee-deep in weeds. Would you keep paying the guy to cut your grass? No. Contracts and covenants are different. A covenant, though, is made for life. This is why at the end of our vows we say that clause, until death do us part. The promises and the covenant we are making with our spouse is a lifetime promise. And what we're saying is that the only way for either one of us to get out of this is somebody's got to die. That's a covenant. So when we talk about faithfulness in marriage, we are talking about faithfulness to the covenant of marriage. This is a bigger deal than just faithfulness between me and a spouse. This is faithfulness to a covenant made by the holy and mighty God. Faithfulness to the covenant of marriage. So when we are faithless or we are unfaithful in marriage, we are talking about being unfaithful to the covenant, to the promises that we've made. So let me break this down a little bit more. Let's kind of go back a little bit. Faith is for promises not realized or received, right? That's what it's talking about at the beginning of this. It says they didn't receive these promises, but they had faith in these promises. They didn't obtain them. They had faith, though, that they were there and they were sure and that they were good. In other words, when you get married, you are making promises in faith. You have not received those promises. You have not received those promises. Faith is believing that those promises are good and that they're going to continue from this day forward, until death do us part. We're saying those things in faith. And so this week I looked up, and I just found this incredibly interesting. I'm going to share this with you. I looked up and found the old Presbyterian church vows. These were church vows from like the 1600s, so it's been a long time ago. We don't use these anymore, but I thought they were really good, so I'm going to share those with you. Listen to how our vows, and you can hear how they've changed, because there's a little bit of similarities, but there's a lot of differences. So listen to this. I'll just use my name again, okay? Well, you put your name there. Brian, wilt thou, got to go with that, right? Wilt thou have this woman to be thy wife? And wilt thou pledge thy faith to her in all love and honor, in all duty and service, in all faith and tenderness, to live with her and cherish her according to the ordinance of God and the holy bond of marriage? That's quite a bit different than what we say today. I thought it was really good. And the thing that got me is that first line. It says, wilt thou pledge thy faith to her? Will you pledge your faith to her? You are pledging your faith to your spouse. Essentially, you are saying is, I promise to believe in you, to put confidence in you, even when I cannot see these promises being fulfilled. That's what you're saying. That I have faith in you, even when it doesn't look like anything's going to come, that you're not even holding up your end of the agreement. I am promising to put my faith in you that you will. That at some point, maybe it's down the road a long ways, but I'm putting my faith in you that you will love me, that you will cherish me, that you will want to live with me. That's what you're saying. You're saying, I'm pledging my faith to you. I'm pledging to maintain my vows, hold up my end of the deal, even when you're not. That's what faith looks like. That's what faithfulness looks like. I started thinking about that word, faithful. It's full of faith. Lord, I want to be full of faith in my marriage. I want to be full of faith. When I think about my marriage, I don't want to be in despair. I want to be in full faith. I want to have hope that this thing is going to continue. That the promises that we made, that they're going to come about. Because when you get up there, let's be honest, and most of us, especially if you had a very short engagement period, but even if you had a long one, I think most of us who've been married for a while can admit we really didn't know our spouse when we got married to them. We thought we did. We had an idea of who they were, but we didn't really know them. And odds are, if you had known them the way that you do now, you might not have married them. I wasn't going to say anything. She shook her head no. She shook her head no, Steve. You can rest. It's going to be okay. So we've talked about our promises, though, but what about God's promise in marriage? Does God make a promise in marriage? When you get married, is God making some sort of promise? Yes. Here's what God promises. God promises that the two shall become one. That's God's promise in marriage. The promise of God is oneness with one another. Notice this pesky word, shall. The two shall become one. So many couples, they assume that they've already been made one. But shall means that the promise has not fully come to pass. That it's going to take time. That it's going to take effort. That you're going to have to surrender yourself to that promise and say, you know what, this is going to be hard work, but I'm willing to do the work. I'm willing to work hard for this. The promise is that we will become one flesh, and God is the one who brings this promise to pass. We cannot will ourselves into being one flesh. It's not something you just conjure up and say, I'm going to try really hard to be one flesh. It doesn't work that way. God does it. It says that God is the one that does it. So if you remember all the way back to the story of Adam and Eve, He was the one who took Adam and Eve and separated Eve out of Adam and then said, and now I'm joining you together. I'm putting you, I'm making you, you will become one flesh. God is promising that as the two of you maintain your faith in the covenant that you made and work toward that end, that He will make you into one flesh. You will become one with your spouse. That's the goal of marriage, and it requires faith. It requires that you entrust yourself to the process of God's design. God designed marriage to do this. He designed marriage with this intent in mind, that you would become one. And this is why unfaithfulness is rebellion against God's design. Unfaithfulness is rebellion against God's design. If the goal of marriage is that the two become one, the problem with unfaithfulness is that we are rebelling against that process. We're halting it. We're stopping it. We are tearing two people apart rather than helping God with this idea of that we will become one with our spouse. We are surrendering to His will for us. In marriage, we stop this process with unfaithfulness. It's incredibly difficult for a lot of couples to forgive unfaithfulness in marriage. Incredibly difficult. It requires confession, forgiveness, time, and a lot of care to get past unfaithfulness. Now, one of the problems that we have in this room right now, is that when I just say the word unfaithfulness, you automatically assume adultery. That is one form of unfaithfulness. There are many forms of unfaithfulness. And this is why I said it was so important for us to understand that marriage is a covenant. And when we break the covenant, we are being unfaithful. And so if you look at it just as a picture of salvation, that we get saved, when we sin, we're breaking the faith. And that's why the Bible will use certain times, it'll use the word faithless rather than unfaithful. That word faithless, if you translate it from the Hebrew, it means to break faith, to act treacherously. We are unfaithful to the covenant promises. And this is, you can find this, Malachi chapter 2, verses 13 to 14. It says this, "And this second thing you do, you cover the Lord's altar with tears, with weeping and groaning, because He no longer regards the offering or accepts it with favor from your hand. But you say, why does He not? Because the Lord was witness between you and the wife of your youth, to whom you have been faithless, though she is your companion and your wife by covenant." Faithless in this context certainly means adultery. The people had basically divorced their wives that they had married when they were younger, and then they were chasing women of foreign gods. This is the context for what Malachi is talking about. But the word faithless, it means to break faith. It's not just a lack of faith. Sometimes when we hear faithless, we think, oh, it's just a lack of, they didn't have any faith. No, they were breaking faith. You acted treacherously in your faith, and that's the full meaning of the word. And many of us, we act treacherously in our marriages. We act treacherously in our marriages, and we do this by not honoring the promises that we made. What were the promises again? To have, to hold, from this day forward, to love, to cherish, until we part by death. So what happens is we don't cherish our spouse. In fact, what we do is we end up treating them with contempt. That is being unfaithful. That is being faithless in your covenant with God. We may look at this and say, well, we don't love our spouse like we should. We don't show them affection. We started withholding affection from our spouse. That means that we are being unfaithful. It's not just adultery. Listen, adultery is a terrible sin. But when we do not honor the promises that we made to our spouse and before God, we are being unfaithful to the covenant that we made with them. And so when we don't cherish our spouse, when we don't adore them, treasure them, or if we start treasuring something else more than them, Jesus said, where your treasure is, right? There your heart is also. When we treasure something more than the person that we promised to treasure, we are being faithless. We are breaking the faith. When we don't make them feel like they belong to us. You know, this is a weird one for me, but I'm just going to bring it up. I've seen so many women sometimes, like you walk in through town, you'll go through the mall, and you'll see them try to hold their spouse's hand, and the guy will visibly not hold her hand. That's what I'm talking about. When we make a promise to have, that's that sense of belonging. That you're not ashamed of your spouse, that you're saying, I am with this person. I belong to her. She belongs to me. If you are distant to them or you give them the silent treatment, that is being faithless. That means you are breaking the faith in the covenant. So what does it look like to be full of faith or faithful? What does it look like to be faithful? Let's go back to our vows. When we are faithful, we are putting faith in the promises of marriage. We are saying, I'm going to be confident in the process of marriage. I'm going to trust God that He knows better than I do. His ways are not my ways, but I'm going to trust that this is all going to work together for my good. I'm going to put faith in the promises of God, and I'm going to put faith in the promises I have made. I'm going to put faith in the promises that she has made. Even though I may never receive those promises. They may never actually be realized. So with that in mind, how do we maintain our faith in marriage? How do we apply this message? Number one, faithfulness is remaining steadfast. Faithfulness is remaining steadfast. When it comes to marriage, let me reassure you, there will be storms. You will most certainly go through some storms. Marriage is, sometimes it feels like it's nothing but storms. Like you just get out of one storm, and the next thing you know, you look in the horizon and there's another cloud headed your way. And you're like, we just made it through this one. I don't know if I can handle another one. Faithfulness is remaining steadfast. Sometimes the storms come from without our marriage, right? It's just, and a lot of times those storms draw the couple closer together. It's me and you versus the world, honey. These are hard times. Work has gone bad. Me and you are going to stand together and we're going to face these storms together. But a lot of times, like when we talk about storms, storms come from within the marriage. Two people battling against each other. When we experience those type of storms, when our spouse breaks faith in the marriage, when she's unfaithful or he is unfaithful, that's the point where I'm talking about we have to remain steadfast. It's what you're saying is I'm going to plant myself in this relationship. I ain't moving. I don't care that you've broken faith. I don't care that you've been unfaithful. I am going to do what God is asking me to do. I am going to honor the covenant that I have made with you, and I am going to remain faithful. I'm going to stand firm. That's what that word steadfast means. Standing firm. Standing firm on what? Standing firm on the promises. This is just as important when we talk about living out our daily lives as Christians. There are going to be storms in your life, and the whole thing that God is asking you to do, He's not telling you go outside and yell at all the storms. What He's asking you to do is to stand firm. When the culture comes against the church should remain firm. Stand firm. Remain steadfast. Number two, faithfulness means being patient. Marriage requires a lot of patience. Listen, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. If you've been married more than 2 days, you're already going, whoo, this has been a long one, all right? I don't know. When we talk about long suffering, some people assume that means marriage, right? Like those are synonyms. It's not. There can be joy in your marriage, I promise you. But marriage does mean that if we're going to talk about faithfulness in marriage, it means that we're going to have to remain patient. Because listen, your spouse, they're not going to change overnight. Because you're not going to change overnight. In fact, it's really hard for any of us to change. It takes God working in us to actually change. And that's why He gives us marriage. Marriage, again, I've said it before, it is a process of sanctification. It is one of the tools that God uses to bring you closer to Him and to make you mirror Him, to make you image Him well. That's the beauty of marriage. So marriage requires patience. This is great things take time, and marriage is a great thing. Number three, faithfulness is staying hopeful. Dave, if you don't mind. Faithfulness is staying hopeful. I have a belief that marriages end because they lose hope. They lose hope. If we're talking about the importance of maintaining faith in the promises that we have made to one another, why do most marriages end? It's because they lost hope. That they're going to either be able to maintain their promises or their spouse is going to be able to maintain theirs. We lose hope. And so part of just being faithful is maintaining hope and saying, I know it doesn't look good out there, because listen, you don't need hope when things are going well. You need hope when things are going bad. I know it doesn't look good out there. I don't know. My spouse is having a real big struggle. She's treating me bad, whatever it may be. But I know it's hard to maintain hope. But I'm going to have hope against hope. That same hope that maybe I entered the marriage with. Yeah, there's a 4 in 10 chance it's not going to make it. Or 2 out of 3 don't make it if it's the second one. But I'm going to maintain hope that it will come to pass. So one of the biggest things you can do when it comes to maintaining your faith is just remaining hopeful that this isn't the end. Remember when there's a promised ending, okay? Remember when that end is? It's when death does you part. So we have to maintain hope throughout this process. So don't let your disappointment turn into hopelessness. Because a lot of times what we do is we'll get disappointed in something that happens in our marriage, and then we lose hope. Don't let your disappointment turn into hopelessness. To be faithful in marriage, you have to maintain hope in the promises of marriage.